Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. I am Chris DeSantis, and I am joined, as I usually am here on Thursday, by Joel Rawlings. Joel, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Is the microphone good enough that when I sip coffee, does it sound like water flowing off of a mountain cliff there?
I
Or is
actually
it is it
couldn't hear
okay?
you sipping coffee, and I'm so
Okay, good.
grateful
Then I can
that
still
allowed,
have that. All right.
yeah, that
So the
allowed
chewing
slurping
my
sound.
breakfast, that's out, but I can slam my coffee. Excellent.
Yeah, Joel's promised me no chewing, even though he hasn't really eaten breakfast yet this
It's
morning.
just starving, just staring at it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We wanted to do as we did last week, get these really sort of we record on a Thursday, right? So we've been able to see the relays and then the prelims of the first full day of NCAAs. But we just, what we do here on this podcast, we jump right in. We talk about some bigger themes of stuff. You saw a few things on the relay yesterday. I have a thing or two that I want to discuss, just big picture from looking at that stuff, and we're going to get into that. But before we do that, as teased appropriately on the podcast, we have a new sponsor, and that sponsor is the Magic 5. If people don't know what the Magic 5 is all about, these are custom fitted goggles. So when you buy a pair of goggles from the Magic 5, you get an app on your phone. It will do a 3D scan of your face. And when you get the goggles, they are custom fitted to your face. And I got a pair of Magic 5 goggles. People who listen to the podcast know that I'm back into competitive swimming. I love these goggles. They are by far the most comfortable pair of goggles I've ever worn in my life. And the thing that's really cool about them is because they're custom fit to your face, you can wear them significantly looser than your typical pair of goggles. So no more goggles like squishing into your eye sockets, no more sort of raccoon eyes after you're done swimming. They're just really, really comfortable goggles. And I don't want to part with them now that I've gotten my pair. I know, Joel, you've been fitted. You haven't gotten yours yet, but they're on the way. So we're looking forward to your review. But they're a sponsor of the Swim Brief, and that means that everybody that listens to this podcast can get a discount. If you go to themagic5.com/the swim brief, you can get 15% off. You use that link, you get 15% off a purchase of a pair of Magic 5 goggles, and you support this podcast because that's part of the sponsorship agreement. Every pair of goggles you buy actually help support us making this podcast. As previously discussed on a lot of these podcasts, we love doing this. We love bringing this stuff to you, and we've gotten a lot of really positive responses over the past few weeks. So we appreciate that, but we also appreciate that kind of support from it. Anything to add to that, Joel?
No, no, I legit am excited about a pair of goggles. I've never been excited about a pair of goggles in my life until this week. So yes,
Yeah, God.
I'm looking forward to it.
They've always been kind of just like a nuisance. Like, yeah, they're there, but this is a pair of goggles I legitimately really enjoy wearing. And I can say too, I've never really enjoyed goggles, so it's a great upgrade. All right, let's get into some of this action. And we decided to, I've been talking a bit about the technology, and I don't want to bore people with the back end of this, but we've been talking about some stuff in terms of how people are swimming. And we made a conscious decision this time that we're going to be able to talk about this while watching some video of what we're talking about. So if you're listening to the podcast version of this, we're going to make an effort to discuss things so that, you're not missing out on the experience. But this podcast is also going to be uploaded to YouTube. And if you want to see what we're talking about as we're talking about it, go ahead and get on the YouTube version of this too, because we're going to be sharing a screen and talking over some video of the first night of NCAAs. And Joel, I guess I'll start here. I texted you last night. The 200 medley had gone off. NC State obviously setting all the records with their 120.6, but a lot of other exciting stuff happening. Just start walking me through some of your reactions looking at that relay.
Yeah, It was fun just kind of watching it. Again, I started like on my phone and I have to squint down. I'm just kind of looking at things. And I honestly think just it kind of helps as far as like just seeing movements and things like that. When you're looking for fluidity of movement, it's kind of like the things that stand out are the things that are like exceptionally fluid or exceptionally like not working as well. And that's the craziest part is all these athletes are such elite level athletes, such high end performers that all of a sudden when someone starts pulling away, you're like, what is going on? But
Yeah.
actually, the one thing that really stood out first, remember, I like what happened in lane 4, and I believe that's Tennessee, right? Where the backstroker, you're like, as soon as like it was like take your mark, and the horn off, like, well, they're out of the race. That was it. And
Yeah.
that's again the amazing part about NCAA in a race like this. And I think what NC State, in a sense, has brought to the table in college swimming is the speed and perfection of their starts, their turns, and things like that. Just nailing those relays. I think didn't like so some come with like Louisville or something like that. You sum all of their relay starts up, and it's like some infinitesimal amount, like 0.1
Right.
seconds or something like that.
I
So
could do
yeah,
it in the
if you're
background
not
here while you're talking.
if you're not on, then you're out. That's it. And these are
Right.
such big points to be there. But if you kind of then so I stopped and just kept going back to the frame, and you're looking at the backstroke starts. A lot of people, especially when they've got that wedge in place, their hips are up out of the water, they're pretty high, they're explosive. There's one I think down in lane 2 or 3. I'm just kind of going off memory, so I'm sorry about like being off on the lanes. But we used
I'm
to
gonna share
call
the
it.
screen while you do this.
Okay,
So
well, great. There you go. Yeah. So again, lane 4 was Tennessee, and then I think down in the bottom you see someone that we called it a Japanese style backstroke start. I don't know if that's correct nomenclature, but I just remember in Japan they were playing around with this a lot with just kind of leaning back, head back, hips closer to the wall, and so just kind of you've done a lot with starts in the past. You're looking at joint angles. Again,
you're in
okay,
lane
down in
3. Yeah.
the third lane, yeah. So he's pretty low in the water, but he's back. And generally, from what I've seen, swimmers like with smaller frames, so their legs not as long of legs like that, usually do pretty well with this because you're already kind of leaning back. And so what I'm looking at anytime I'm looking at these starts, and definitely I wouldn't call this my field of expertise, but I just kind of looking at like their center of mass, it's going to be in the hips, and how they
Right.
line that up behind their center of buoyancy to get into the water. And so you see across the field pretty much everyone's fairly high in the water, except Tennessee, he's kind of down in the water a little bit. And
Right.
so looking at the joint angles, usually kind of looking for, a good loaded position. So like around 90 degrees. And so on go, you'll see again, he doesn't get into the water as cleanly for some reason. Again, I don't watch his starts daily, so I don't know what happened here, but it looks like the hips dropped or maybe
Right.
flexed too much into that again. So the center of buoyancy dropped too far below the center of mass. And so he wasn't able to kind of get that pushing. So what I mean by that is, the bulk of the weight is going to be in your hips. And so if that is driving behind the center of buoyancy, you're going to get, a really strong push. And then in the underwater movement, it's that dolphining movement, which starts from the chest. Again, that's what's going to drive that stroke and that breakout. And so you see into the first cycle, and for people that are just listening to the podcast, if they cue that up, he's already half a body length behind. You can look at the wake patterns off these athletes. Again, I was just looking at my phone, and so that's one of the nice things is you kind of look at the splash. Anytime there's splash, obviously there's going to be energy that's leaving the system. It's going into the water, and it's non-propulsive. It's leaving the system. And so when you look at Tennessee, there's a huge bow wave kind of a thing going. So he's pushing a lot of water for some reason, and that's slowing him down. So he had a lot of drag right away. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
you look at NC State up and they're moving pretty quick. And so then
Yeah.
going into that, I mean, that first wall, that race is over. What are you going to do with what 170, 108, 180 yards to go? There's no way you're getting off of that.
Well, I mean, one thing that strategically I think has always, just been how it is. It's. I guess I almost said it's not fair, but it is fair. It's just sort of the way it is. Is to me that on a 200 medley relay. First, I love having a conversation like this because you're right. Like there's so many little details that have to come together to put together a relay, for instance, like the one that NC State had. So it's just a great race where you see all four strokes, lots of tiny little details, stuff coming together in a certain way. Um, and but what I was going to say, what's not fair, I guess, or is fair, is that backstroke is the most important stroke on the 200 medley relay. Especially when you look at a race like this, as you say. I mean, part of the reason there's an individual factor here for the swimmer from Tennessee has to do with some of the stuff that he did in the start, but there's also other people in the race, and now he's breaking out, into the waves of the rest of the field. And that puts them at a disadvantage the rest of the way. And it's going to put their breaststroke at a disadvantage when their breaststroker dives in and has to swim through the same wake from the other lanes. So, this stuff has a cumulative knock-on effect. And if you just watch an individual leg, in isolation from what's happening in the rest of the relay, I don't think you get the full. I think you're making a point here that you don't really get the full picture of what happened, because it is influenced by, your breaststroke leg is influenced by what happens in the backstroke. Your butterfly is influenced by what happened in the first half of the race, and even your freestyler on the end, right?
Right.
If they have to swim through the entire field's wake at the end, it's going to affect how they swim.
And I think sometimes we get caught up in the idea of, that wave just being like, thinking about like, the waves hitting your body. But I think even more than that, it's the difference between like you're swimming in surf, like that white foam surf, versus still water that's flat and has a different density and surface tension to it. And especially on something like a 50, where you're getting up and you're trying to hit cycle rate so fast, where you're kind of, I don't know really a good way to explain other than like you're trying to exert your will onto the water instead
Right.
of kind of responding back with the water. So in a sense, there's a certain amount of tension that the water is going to have. And you want to apply, I would say, just off the top of my head, that if you wanted to swim your fastest, you want to apply the same amount of tension on the water as the water's resistance is to you. And that would be like, perfect traction. Like if I'm trying to run on ice, the idea is like, I want to run as exactly as fast as I can without getting any slippage at all, And that's
Right.
the same thing as now all of a sudden, all he has is ice. Well, not he, but actually, yeah, all he has at this point, because his first 2-3 hand hits where he's trying to set up his tempo, he's trying to set up his stroke, it's in that whitewash. And so that water is moving a lot faster than it has a different density to it. And he's not going to be able to hold the water as much into that. And so, kind of looking at this, one of the things that, you always wonder, like, what's the next level going to look like? And that was one of the things I always try to think about when I'm looking at strokes is like, okay, well, if someone wants to go 19 in the backstroke, what's that going to look like? And I think part of that is going to go back to that start. The idea is like, what's the difference between backstroke and freestyle? Obviously, the start, being able to hit the angle of the center of mass driving the center of buoyancy into the water, using the center of buoyancy as the tool in which you're going to go underwater dolphining with to get to the surface and go from there. And I think just that angle, again, when you see the Tennessee person going off the block and just the bow to his back like that, again, once that center of mass, for instance, isn't lined up, and there might be a certain amount of structural tension that goes into the spinal cord, that goes into the lungs, in a sense, the lungs being the center of buoyancy. I think he lost something there. And again, I'm not trying to pick on Tennessee. I think it's such a progressive program. That's why I was kind of surprised to see them being off on this. But again, this is something that NC State, or like if you look at Virginia's women, this is where they are on, is all those little points like that. Like they just, they take a watch, like, let's go 5 meters. How fast are you to 5? All right. How far are you to 10? How far are you to 15? How fast are you going on each of these points? And going back to try to find what point might be what's throwing them off on this race. So obviously the backstroke sets this up. Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The question that I'm thinking of while I'm listening to you talk, Joel, is like, what would you say? So, I mean, I can imagine that some of these swimmers, like maybe to avoid picking on Tennessee, anybody that, was swimming through a lot of wake in this field, they just happen to be in the middle of the pool. So it's particularly disadvantageous. But anybody that's swimming through some wake, like maybe your breaststroker comes back, right? And of course, we're already covering the ground of like maybe you're not going to give technical advice later. But if you had a chance, at the appropriate time to say to that person, and they came back and went like, I just couldn't get going, right? I was just literally, they described to you what you're talking about, that they were swimming on ice. How would you prepare them for that situation? Like, would you, because, part of me is listening to this and goes like, well, just make sure you're never on ice. But like,
Yeah.
you can't do that. Right. So like, how would you prepare somebody for that situation? What would you do?
I think this is one of those things where you need to allow athletes to experience a lot of different varieties in practice. So many times we kind of set the pool up like, pool's the same. That old Hoosiers thing. Where he pulls out the measuring tape. Yep, baskets. Same height as back at Hickory. That kind of thing. But pool's
Right.
different. Everything is different. Everything changes on each point of these races internally with acidosis going on. It changes with the depth, it changes with the width of the lanes, all those little things in there that coaches are always striving for their facility. But I think also just kind of like, managing internally what's going on. Kind of, you have this expectation, like, I'm not supposed to be at these guys' hips. I'm supposed to be up there. And the challenge of the swimmer being like over swimming that, swimming in chop. One thing that we did, again, this is Division III team, so doesn't really mean it's going to help anyone's team other than it did pretty well for ours, is we would go every other lane. Actually, every lane would have one of those thick bungee cords. And if we ever get a sponsorship for those, I'd give them a shout out for sure. And so we'd have 6 of those, and then we'd have we'd pull all the lane lines out, and then have swimmers in the basically where the lane line would go. So it'd be like 6 swimmers with cords, then 5 swimmers without cords. The 5 swimmers would push off, and they would start to sprint. And then the next group would go, and they would go with the cords, and they would start to sprint. And so you create this huge wall of water where
Right.
they would start to get it building up behind them, and then they would race with that wall of water. So in a sense, they're getting kind of pushed by that wake. And so trying to get a feel for that, for being out and ahead. What are you going to do to manage that extra speed you're getting? But then also doing it where, okay, they're going to push off maybe half a second slower. So now they're getting in that wake, and they're getting surrounded by that wake and what they're going to do. And just kind of doing lots of little things like that, and taking moments where they're like, what happened there? How did that feel? Is there anything I can do? And again, it's like, it's pretty fun. It's non-confrontational. Just get out there and experiment with trying different things in different tempos, but more importantly, feeling how the water changes around their body versus, I'm just going to put my hand in the water and rip it. This is about, again, trying to create different senses. So in a sense, trying to make the water different densities a little bit, which sounds pretty esoteric, I suppose, in Northern California-ish, but that's kind of what it is a matter of just getting it so that they have to slip on ice every now and then, and just learn that, you're going to have to change something in there. And me not knowing what that is, I always thought it wasn't a bad thing, because again, if I over-explain it, like I'm over-explaining it right here, it kind of kills that moment. They have to internally figure out what's going on, and they need to internally figure that out. And it upsets athletes a lot. Like, what, just boil it down. Give me the answer, black or white. Just tell me which one. I'll take that. They want the answers to the test. They don't really want to learn what's on the test. And so same thing here is like, they want the answer. Like, I don't know what the answer is. You gotta figure that out. And so
and if you just get them to memorize the answer, like, okay, maybe they're gonna be able to do something in a very in a limited sense. Like, I think you're pointing to a piece here where as coaches, we always want to actually teach them the second thing. We want to teach them how to figure it out themselves, because also just from the mental end of it, like that's what gives you confidence. You go like, I figured it out. I know what to do. Like, you start to trust yourself that you can respond dynamically in different situations. And it's not like, because, again, in this race, you don't have time to, like, the backstroker doesn't have time to pop his head up and go, hey, coach, I'm swimming through a lot of wake here. What do I do? You got to just do something. You have to have some some sort of, as you say, practiced response to that. All right, should we watch Marchand's 50 breaststroke or what?
Yeah,
Can we,
that was the whole thing I was trying to get to when I saw the thing. But then right there, you're like, oh, let's stop. What's going on here? Yeah, let's see it.
All right,
Let's hit it.
We're gonna do it. And it, you know,
the prelude to this is what I love about it is I saw the final split already. It was like 22-2. And usually, you know, again, a guy that's so great at 400 IM, 200 breaststroke, 100 breaststroke, to do the 50 breaststroke like he did, I think is just amazing, absolutely spectacular. In that, again, it's like his stroke is all about striking kind of that line, that distance per stroke, where he's like, going off the top of my head, I think his 200 breaststroke was 3 and 5s all the way across. And here he went like, you know, 4 to 6, I think. I didn't count that time. I counted it fairly late at night. But I always liked counting strokes just because, again, I had a lot of kids in the water. And for me, the tempo watch was really a great tool to have. But it was hard for me to kind of sit on that the whole time.
So 4 strokes on the first 25, hits it basically exact.
And then, yeah, and that's the thing is he's hitting those walls money, you know.
3, 4, 5, and then 6 on the second 25.
And you know what makes a great podcast is when they listen to 2 guys sitting there counting 1 to 6.
the audio portion of this, that'd be just you and I counting strokes.
That's how Stretch Cords is finally going to become our big sponsor, is because we can count to 6 on our own. But again, that change in tempo. So without having a watch, without having technology, just knowing he's able to change that tempo. And I remember, you know, you watch. You know, I always look back to like Kitajima's breaststroke and just the fluidity that has versus the PD, which is just, you know, raw power, tempo, hips driving forward. And I think Marchand strikes a really nice balance as far as like being able to lunge forward and what I think is going on. And so on that pullout that we talked about ad nauseum on that Marchand 200 breaststroke, I think part of that is on his underwater, he's really setting up with that air and kind of the platform that he uses to dive off of, that platform being the lower part of his pelvis. So from there, as he draws the hips forward, it kind of creates like a platform that he surges with the upper body off of. And so that he drives that forward, he brings the kick in behind that. So it's like you're kicking a moving object into a line, which is, you know, no doubt he's swimming. Of course, he's moving forward. But because that surge comes in and then the kick powers through, it doesn't have to be like a power kick. It's a tempo kick, which is, you know, obviously it's a lot different when you're doing a 50 like that. It's usually just get up and go, go, go. Here he's able to, again, get a good point where he's anchoring the water with his arms. He's holding a spot in the water. He's driving his hips forward to that anchor point, and he surges off of that anchor point. The anchor point again is the lower platform from his like lower abs, top of his hips, the pelvis area, and he surges off of that. And so what I kind of look at is, again, when he gets out, I always just call it the Y press, where he's out to the corners of his stroke, whatever you want to term it as, and the in sweep starts. That becomes the point where I'm going to kind of look at his distance per stroke, where the hands are, it's kind of like holding himself in a spot. Like I think about like a downhill skier pulling themselves through the gate at the start of the race. The hands are that anchor point. And as the hips curl underneath him, again, it creates kind of that bow you draw a bow from like his lower back up to the top of his head. That loads up energy. He springs forward on that. And the weight of his torso starts to pull him forward, and then you boom the kick, and it's kind of like throwing in an afterburners on the end. So he's already moving forward explosively fast using his core, and then he drives forward with the kick a little bit into a line. And obviously with the 50, he's not looking to hold that line for distance per stroke like he does in the 100 or 200. This is all about just getting into the next stroke and hitting again. And that's why he goes, again, 5 instead of 3, and then 6s.
Yeah, I'm
sorry.
Yeah, and then like this, I just freeze framed on this for a second while you were talking, because I am just fascinated to see. I mean, so I think you make a point about the fact that it is very, very rare that you look at the best. I would like to know when the last time the best 400 IMer at the NCAA championships was also the fastest 50 breaststroker on a medley relay. Like it is extremely, extremely uncommon. And I think if you look at this field, and I think if you just made a lineup of all these guys who are swimming 50 breaststroke, I would gather that Marchand is probably the smallest guy. Like, these are physically imposing in comparison to him guys. I mean, just like by sheer body mass, right? And I just freeze frame on this pullout where, the rest of the field is behind him. Okay. And everybody has started swimming. And he has not kicked up into his stroke yet. And then he takes
Right.
6 strokes.
Right.
Like it is just the structure of it is so different from a lot. And it made me think that we're pretty close to seeing a 21 split on 50 breaststroke.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Like,
I think
as you said,
if you pause the video at any point on any of these, whatever, again, if you're listening versus watching this, you're going to have front, resistance in the front, that bow wave. You see the splash going forward as the body striking forward. And I always kind of look at what direction that splash is going. Is it going straight up, which is basically just energy totally being lost in the system? Is it going forward a little bit, meaning that the body's landing on that bow wave and surging and kind of surfing down? But then also looking on the backside, like especially the lower back, the hips, how much like a vacuum wave turbulence again is back there as well. And so that's the other thing that they're fighting. So they've got the head wall, but they've also got the vacuum behind them. And basically how they're evading the water is really what's going to get them going the best. And a friend of mine said that his high school coach said all the best breaststrokers were the laziest people ever. And he meant that in a good way, Chris. I know you're very hard.
Wow, I'm taking that so personally right now, Joel.
Yeah, I know. But it's because they have to be lazy, because they have to evade the water. It's such a high drag stroke that they're evading water at all points. And so you've got, they have to evade the water in the front in a sense where they're skimming across the top. And again, using their body like a surfboard, landing on that bow wave and driving it forward. And also evading the water that's coming from the back, which is, again, that suction and force back. And so I really watch, especially as they fatigue out on that lower back, how much water are they in a sense carrying on their back versus what you see with a lot of these great breaststrokers is it's almost like it stays dry the whole time.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to transition to the 800 freestyle relay. And as we make that transition,
you didn't want to watch NC State's fly. That fly is amazing. All right.
Fine. We'll do it, Joel, just for you. Okay. So
because I'm watching Marchand's breaststroke, you're stuck there looking. And this is the thing that, again, where I get pretty excited. I'm glad you slow me down sometimes about stuff like this, is the idea that, all these athletes are so insanely good. We don't even have to see the video, but the idea, again, that when someone takes off and does something differently, that's why I usually don't like to look at the times first, because the times you end up kind of using as justification. Well, whatever they've done is good. 22.2, therefore everything in that was perfect, rather than that idea again, well, what's a 19.9 backstroke look like? Or what's a 21 breaststroke look like? In your head, like you start to think, what are those things going to look like? What are the drag forces going to come on? Things like, and so you start to think about that. And again, when you assign the number too many times, it's like, that becomes, well, that's perfect. And then where are you going to go from there? And so what I loved again was the exchange, that butterfly, or again, just skimming across. You can see again, when you're watching these flyers, all the short axis strokes, how they're kind of using the pelvic wall to use as like a springboard in a sense to keep going forward on the stroke and driving and getting the distance per stroke from that. It's almost like a small platform that they go forward on. I think too many times we get caught up on what's moving. Look at the arms, look at the catch, look at the power, look at the strength versus what's the core doing, what's the wave around them doing, and the efficiency of the movement. Again, because at a certain point, water's going to win. They're at 3 meters per second, that head wall just becomes pretty fierce. And if you're not doing something right, it's going to catch you hard.
Yeah, it's exceptional. And I mean, even you said, like, one of the points you keep making is, watch that bow wave, also watch what's happening behind him. And I think that's an exceptional part of this butterfly. I think it's Cristania, right? That was swimming, if I look for NC State. Yeah, it's Cristania going 19.1 down there. So Corstania, and the piece where he we cue it up, right up in lane 6. So here on the video,
Right. And so right there, I mean, basically,
yeah,
he's almost caught up just on the breakout alone. And again, that's, I
yeah,
think, where NC State excels at. And it's really fun for me to watch that. It's kind of like, I think so many times we're like, freestyle is where it's at. Everyone wants to do a 50 freestyle. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I want to, I kind of want to see the fly and the breaststroke again. The strokes like that, again, seem to make or break so many of these relays like that. But again, we talked at the beginning about Tennessee. I mean, look at how much they had to do, how much work they had to do to get back into that race. And again, it's already over. But again, just an amazing two medley.
It had a knock on, right? Like, I mean, you would on paper, you'd go, well, they have Crooks on fly. Crooks did an 18 on fly at SECs. Yeah. And I think Crooks, like this morning, he was exceptional in the 50. He was 18.2. He looks like he's right on for this meet. But what I'm guessing is that if I look back on that video of when he was going 18 for fly, I bet the water was a lot cleaner than this instance, right? And here he is, as you said, he's swimming on ice, and maybe he's capable of the same split, but instead, result-wise, what did Crooks end up going? Only 19.2. And then I say only 19.2 because it's like so exceptionally fast, right? On some scale. But, like you said, you were talking about totaling up the relay splits, and I was doing some of that in the background. I mean, you have relays on here where the sum of their relay starts is 3 or 4 tenths of a second. And if you had decent relay exchanges, maybe you were 6 or 7 tenths of a second cumulatively on your relay. Well, 3 tenths of a second made a big difference in terms of placing in this relay. So it's not insignificant in that respect. Okay, let's switch over because and I want to say this in the transition as we go from one relay to the next. I just on a personal level, this is probably the most excited I've been for an NCAA championships in I don't know how long. Like I am just an extra level of into this meet, and I think I have to give credit. First, let's give credit to the teams that have historically in my lifetime brought it to this meet. I mean, Texas, if you looked at the pre-meet psych sheet, they looked to be not even in contention for this. If you look at this morning's prelim session, it's like, oh yeah, they're in contention just like they always are, right? So they're there. Cal is doing everything that they're supposed to do as far as I'm concerned. And Arizona State, I think they're the ones who really they brought so much excitement to this meet for me because it's just somebody new, right? It's just somebody else in the mix that we haven't seen for quite some time. And I think NC State is swimming exceptionally as well. So, just to have the meet not be a foregone conclusion and to have teams like contending at the top, I mean, it just makes for a really exciting competition. And we don't always get that.
One team I really like to watch too is Louisville. Louisville is just always does such an amazing job at NCs. They really seem to take another gear up, which is also really cool. Again, and one of the things you were mentioning, like with ASU, usually like you see every now and then, like, a team will slip a couple in there. Like you're like, oh my gosh, where'd this guy come from? He's out of like let's just say like a Montana. I remember years back they had that breaststroker, or something like that, where you're like, or was it Wyoming? I think it was
Wyoming. Yep. Yeah,
but again, you'd see one, but for ASU to come out of nowhere, and it's like not out of nowhere with one swimmer. It's like, dang, they're stocked, and they're going to be a top 3 team. Right. And that is kind of a cool thing. Like around basketball time, where we always think about like the Cinderella stories, and swimming really, you can't do that. You can't just out scheme another team. Either you have the horses or you don't. And all of a sudden to come in with the kind of talent and firepower that they have is amazing. It really is. It's for them to come on the scene. And it was, again, you think back when, 80s and 90s, you just, before the meet would start, I don't know, it's going to be Stanford, it's going to be Texas, it's going to be Georgia. One of those three. It's just going to be like that. It's done, and then everyone else, fourth to sixth on down. And all of a sudden, Cal starts coming in, and all of a sudden,
Auburn.
It's like Cal.
We have the Auburn era.
Oh yeah.
Just Auburn every
exactly.
year.
Auburn even a little bit earlier, but yeah. So that was the thing that's pretty cool. Is again, all these teams now have a chance at it, and I wonder too if part of it is, with all the recruiting changes, some of these people that might get overlooked earlier, they're able to go somewhere else, and or find a good fit, or maybe it could just be the internet where you're able to kind of look at what other teams are doing a little bit more than ever before, and kind of find a program that's a good fit for what your athleticism needs.
Yeah. So Texas gets 12th. This too. I mean, in the 200 medley relay, they were 122.9, which for those of you interested in history, not with the same tense, but 122 was a winning time in this relay as recently as 2019. So not that long ago. But anyway, Texas, is just a couple tenths away from not scoring in this
Correct.
200 medley relay. And then, if you wanted to have your moment of like, finally we can stick a fork in Texas, those were those 50 minutes or whatever between the 200 medley relay and the 800 free relay. That's all you got. Because they come out, they set a American record in NCAA record. I don't know if everybody's American. I think they are. But anyway, one record or another in this 800 freestyle relay. You don't listen to this podcast for accuracy of who broke what record. I want to watch this because I want to watch two pieces of it. I actually want to watch the leadoff again with you from Hobson from Texas and just get a couple of your thoughts right off the cuff while you're watching it. And then I want to watch the anchor leg where we have Carson Foster anchoring for Texas and Marchand again in the water for ASU. So I'm going to bring up screen share. You can talk over it as I prepare.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking of with this 800 free relay, how one swim on the back end by Marchand almost took all the conversation away from an NCAA record relay like this. I mean, that's just how amazing his anchor split was. But Texas's relay, again, is just amazing. I mean, from the start, you're like, again, these are all such elite level athletes. To pull away like that is unbelievable. And what really strikes me is just, again, how he's setting his walls up so far away like that now. Again, I'm always thinking like center of mass is driving the center of buoyancy. And getting into the walls, he's really, again, keeping that momentum in the hips, if this makes sense. So that's driving behind the center of buoyancy. He's pressuring down into that center of buoyancy and getting that rotation over. So it's not so much about like throwing your legs at the wall. It's kind of like Lochtey's turn, where again, it's about taking that momentum and transferring that momentum into the rotation and then just jumping off the wall. And right. Each wall just so clean. Yeah.
It is freaking me out as I'm watching it. You make a good point about the turn, because my mind is going, he's too far.
Right.
And then he's not, he's actually set it up almost as good as I've ever seen.
And so not to, take away the shine from Texas here, but that was kind of like the idea with Marchand in his dual meet swim versus his Pac-12 swim was, again, his nervous system was just kind of catching up to that speed. It's the same thing here, where these guys are hitting their turns so well. Again, where to be able to kind of know where their speed now and know where they have to hit their turns is pretty cool to see. Again, it's such an exciting relay to watch. Again, for them to pull ahead, where what are they almost? The leadoff is like 4 yards ahead of everybody. Yeah. I remember when I coached at TCU way back in the prehistoric times, I was like at morning practice for dryland, and I thought they'd set the jump boxes up to a height where coaches could come in and lean on with their elbow and drink a cup of coffee. And then this one guy walks up, he's like, "Excuse me, coach." And one of the basketball players, he just starts jumping up on the box that I was just leaning on. And, it's just, I'd never seen anything jump that high and that quietly before. He was like a cheetah. The guy goes to the NBA. He's the 12th man. He gets put in, and basically, the commentators are just what a poor chump he is, how unathletic he is, but it's like, so when you see him compared to other NBA players, yeah, he's unathletic. When you see him in real life, you're like, no one this big has ever moved that fast before. And so the same thing here is like, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this field. These are such amazing athletes. I mean, these are the best athletes in the world at their craft. And to be 4 yards ahead is just so insane.
Right.
And again, I really think there's something with this loping kind of stroke. We hit that ad nauseum, I think probably about a year ago and before the Olympics too. I honestly think that there's something going on with the pressuring in the chest on the water. It kind of, one thing is obviously that stroke opens up that window for the inhale, exhale. So again, you got the air coming in, air going out. Again, you have to be able to time that, which is the cool part about swimming, I think, is that your stroke tempo is going to dictate the amount of time you're going to get in for air and exhale the air. So you're blowing off the CO2. We talked about that before, the idea that that's the breath trigger is the CO2 accumulation. And so I think part of that is that loping stroke kind of creates this tempo that they're able to regulate that breathing and obviously regulate everything internally, what's going on, but also that pressing in the chest. It's kind of like, I've seen those hydrofoils that people surf on where you're kind of pressuring the water to get electric speed. I wonder if almost like they're using their torso like a hydrofoil to get more pressure on the water and get a little more surge when that arm comes around the surface of the water. So again, not thinking so much what's going on under the water, but thinking about what's going on over the water. So the pressure, downward motion with the chest as he finishes the inhale, throwing the arm, and again, kind of creating that chain that's going to drive chest, arm, hip, pulling everything down into the stroke. But again, you see these turns are the things that really catch my eye for Texas right now.
Yeah, and I would say what caught my eye more than anything, I'm just watching this again, is you have Carson Foster, who's swimming excellently
Mm-hmm.
on the anchor for Texas, and Marchand is he's like the shark from Jaws. Like, yeah. He's just reeling him in. And I remember watching it live, and of course Rowdy's doing the Rowdy thing where he goes,
yeah.
He can't catch him. He can't catch him.
He's setting himself up for I can't believe he caught him.
Right.
That kind of moment. Yeah, and I would love to kind of know what's going on through the relay's mind. We're like, oh, we've got this. This is amazing. Just kind of like just suck it in, enjoy the crowd, and then also like, dang, he's actually kind of on my heels.
Yeah, it doesn't feel safe.
That close is insane.
It doesn't feel safe at all. I mean, I had to look again. It's good to watch the swims and then look for the splits later. I had to look later and see that Foster did 130.1, and he was just getting reeled in. I mean, he like
128.
Well, I guess when somebody goes 128 and you go 130, then it does look like you lost a lot of ground, or that they caught up a lot of ground, right? But so he's swimming excellently on the end of this, and yet it does seem to come. We could go back to your point, and then I want to bring this one to a close. You talk a bit about some of this stuff with the chest and the center of buoyancy. I mean, I think that I guess one of the ways I've always heard this discussed, and one of the reasons I caught on with some of the things that Milt was saying, and it just made a lot more sense to me, was, people always talk about swimming, right, like on top of the water. And then I think a lot of people are going to hear what you say about like pushing that center of buoyancy down, and they're going to think like, well, that's stupid, Joel. Like, why would you swim lower in the water? But that's not really how you view it, right? As like a higher or lower, or I guess I should say on top of or under the water, right?
Yeah, I think I guess I'm trying to figure out why I started kind of thinking of stuff like this. And I like how you say a lot of people that hear me. So all 8 people that listen to this podcast, yes, there's all 8 people that are listening. Like, what are you talking
thousands
about?
And thousands of downloads.
Thousands.
You
Dang,
got to
now I
stop
got to
making
start
that
wearing
joke
something
because
besides
it's
my
not
hoodie,
true.
huh? I think one of the things that I looked at was the idea that I can't outpower a Texas. I can't out train a Florida. I can't out train any of those teams. We never had the pool time. We never had the pool space. We didn't have the same athletes. So what we had to do is think about basically how are they evading the water again, because you can get a small guy to do that. You're pointing out those backstrokers are huge. The breaststrokers are huge. Max McHugh he's a giant. He's a walking mountain of a human being. And I'm never going to see an athlete like that in my life, in my pool that I'm coaching at. And so it was the idea that what are we going to do to offset that power? And so what we can do is we can evade the water. We can lunge into a line. And then you're like, okay, now you're in that line position. Think about like a surfboard moving in the water is one of the things I always thought about was when I'm on the board and you pressure the board correctly. So again, it's sinking down in the water and you have that wave coming behind you. That's what causes you to surf down is you create that pressure. And now the water's responding against that pressure and your body's responding against the water. And that's creating some momentum. Versus if all of a sudden I power it and I stand too far on the back end of the board or too far in the front of the board, I just crash into the wave and it's all over. And so the idea of kind of getting that is something that, again, like you said, a smaller person can do. A smaller person can kind of control their mass in the water, can control how their center of mass is lining up behind their center of buoyancy, and then thinking about how you're going to connect that with the internal structures from, basically from your chest bone all the way down to your sacrum. And so I think that's what I try to look at in freestyle, and I'm trying to look at it in breaststroke and in all those strokes is just, again, how that's lining up and how the center of mass is going to be driving that center of buoyancy and how that center of buoyancy can help pull the center of mass. And then thinking about what the weight of the arms, and this is the classic Bill Boomer kind of a thing of what's the weight of the arms, the weight of the head, the weight of whatever it is that's being thrown over the surface of the water, how that's pulling those two things down the pool as well. Versus I'm going to strap on some paddles, I'm going to hitch myself up to the power tower, and we're going to just pull some heavy buckets and get going. And again, more power to people that have that. Is just that was a tool we didn't have, and that was an athlete I didn't have. And so that's why I kind of look at it. And so a lot of these athletes, they don't need to have perfect technique. They got a nervous system that can accommodate a lot of load. And again, that's really cool. And I'm not knocking what they do. That's very impressive. I'm gobsmacked as anyone. I mean, watching Kate Douglas and Marchand right now is a pretty cool time in the sport.
Yeah. I mean, the story I always tell that I think goes in line with the one that you said and why I think this conversation is so important. When I was coaching at Georgia Tech, a couple guys that I had that were sprinting there. Okay, one of them was maybe about 5'9". He weighed 150 pounds on a good day. The stuff that he did, and you said like I'm really into starts. The stuff that he did in terms of a start, probably the best I've ever seen. Okay, just every piece of it, how the whole movement came together. I wish I had some videos still to watch and enjoy and think about how I could get other people to move the same way. And there was another guy who was all over the place. But he was 6'5" and 200 pounds. And one day I just decided I'm going to come in and I was going to measure like how good everybody was at a start. And what was my arbitrary measure that I came up with? I timed their head passing 10 meters. Who do you think was faster? The guy who did everything right, but was 5'8", 150 pounds? No, the guy was 6'5" and 200 pounds. Like it didn't matter that he didn't move the same way. And you can take away from that. You can go, well, I guess it doesn't matter. Or you can take away from that, that it's worth actually investing in some of this stuff, or you're always going to be playing a game that's rigged out of your favor. Like, again, most of us do not coach the most talented, most physically gifted, most physically dominant people in the sport. And we're trying to be successful. We're trying to be competitive. We're trying to help the people that we coach to be competitive. And are we going to just look at it and try to do a lesser version of what some other people are doing, or are you going to try to come up with something to give yourself an advantage in that
And I think
situation? And
kind of
I think the latter.
piggybacking on what you just said there, again, that what I would look at too, because again, I'm not going to get that, Hulk smash dude on the water where he's going to beat the guy to 15 meter, but that was one jump. You're going to do the mile, you got a lot more of those jumps coming. And so eventually that dude is going to fatigue out. And so as long as you take the athlete who's the smaller, or whoever's going to listen, or whoever can figure it out, actually, it doesn't matter if they listen, if they can figure it out is really the point. So if they can figure it out, the idea that everyone's going to be fatigued, and what they need to do is they need to take whatever energy they have and put it into something that's going to get the most bang for their buck, kind of the money ball aspect of swimming. They're going to get the most out of, again, getting into an alignment, getting their body into that surfboard shape where, again, their center of buoyancy is getting driven by the center of mass. Everything's lined up. They're using their core muscles to keep that engagement. And then in the end of the race, that's where I want to see happen. That's why I want to measure the 6'5" versus the 150 kid. After 66 jumps, who's winning now? And so the idea of kind of like taking a race and building it backwards. And that's what I loved about breaststroke, because it's pretty simple counts. Like, let's just say you have 16 really good strokes in you. Well, how are we going to get it so that 16, you're almost done with that race, versus, well, we're just going to muscle through it like we always do.
Let's just do 16 and we'll have 17 through 23 be awful, but we'll just hang on for dear life. Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the last podcast we talked about with, like, what do you say at the end of the race? Because I'm always getting super jacked up at the idea, like, oh, there's so much more we can do now. Like, and then also in the same, I have to temper that back, because I'm just saying that it was a great race, but there's more. And so again, you never stop to smell the flowers in the sport, because you're like, oh, so I could have gone better than my best time. Thanks. Right. And so, but that's kind of the fun, is trying to balance that as a coach. You're like, thinking that in your head, not saying that out loud, and thinking how we're going to build the bigger, better, model next time around.
All right. Well, thank you, Joel. Thanks for coming. Thanks for reacting to all this stuff and sharing everything. Thank you to the Magic 5. It's themagic5.com/the swim brief. 15% off on a custom fitted pair of goggles. Positive psychology content in bite-sized form. Instagram, Christy_coach. Facebook, CD Swim Coach. And anything else to plug? Get on the YouTube if you want to watch video of some of this stuff. It'll probably get demonetized, but I don't monetize my channel, so we're all safe.
I think one thing you should look at too,
for the video that we used, because it was better than definitely. The NCAA video.
Yeah, SwimSam did a great job. But also, one of the guys I've been talking to is thinking a little bit more about the pelvic floor and how that's utilized. If you go to Instagram, Slow Mo Swimming Guy, he has some really cool stuff up there. So Instagram, that would be a great guy to check out.
Oh, maybe we need to get him on the podcast, Slow Mo Swimming
Guy. I'm afraid to, because then I am useless. That guy sees stuff way better than I do. I wish
you're out of here.
I know. That's why I don't take a day off.
All right. Thanks, Joel. And I'll see you again in a week.
All right. Thanks. Bye. We good?